So apparently last week, Oda took a break off of writing One Piece because he had to do some research. Now, there was an article, I think, last week on around, like, Thursday or Friday, and it stated that Oda took off to have research. Now, necessarily, I don't know what type of research Oda had to do, but for Oda to look into some research, that's pretty interesting, because that must mean there must be something very massive about to go down for Oda to actually go back and probably research something either in his manga, go out, research something. I don't know what it is, but that's interesting to see how Oda took a break, not because he was sick or wanted just a break, but because he wanted to research. So we'll have to see exactly what that is about, but that was supposedly the reason why One Piece was on break last week, which took me by surprise, because I did not know One Piece would be on break until the day it arrived. I'm like, what the hell? So, yeah. Anyways, this chapter of One Piece, I want to be just straight out honest, it's only 15 pages long, or 14 if you cut out the title page, pretty much, like, you know, the chapter title page. So it's like 14 pages long. This is an incredibly short chapter. I'm not joking. Like, this is just a straight up incredibly short chapter of One Piece, and honestly, there was not really much that was fully going on. It was a good chapter, don't get me wrong, but it wasn't like the standard One Piece type chapters we have recently been getting. So personally, here's my, like, you know, I guess viewpoint on this chapter. I personally believe this chapter was a chapter that was there to stall for Oda to write out whatever he was doing because of what he did last week. For instance, since we know Oda supposedly did some research last week, I feel like this chapter was probably made on the fly for Oda to probably stall some time just a little bit for whatever he was researching to put later up into the manga. So I'm willing to bet, like I said, that this chapter, the reason why it's so short is because Oda was just taking so much time to research whatever he was doing. So I think that probably justifies why this chapter feels so short, or why there was barely any progression in this chapter. I mean, there was progression and wasn't progression. The main points of progression you can get from this chapter is Luffy getting punched by Bellamy. Bellamy punching Luffy with hockey. Whoa. Now, the hockey thing has been kind of slightly foreshadowed with Bellamy, so I can't really say it came out of nowhere. It has slightly been hinted for a while now, so it just doesn't pop out of nowhere. But the thing is, I found very interesting about the panel where Bellamy punches Luffy. I couldn't tell, I could be wrong, but in the panel, it looked like Luffy put hockey on his stomach. It looked like Luffy was blocking too with hockey, but like I said, I couldn't really tell from the panel or not, but it looked like Luffy also used hockey to block whatever Bellamy was doing to him, and it also seemed like Luffy took the hit on purpose. So, very interesting. I mean, of course, I'm guessing the reason why Luffy took the hit was because Bellamy's technically his friend, and he realizes that Bellamy really can't take any hard punches or he might kill over, since we already know what's happened to him with, you know, Dolphy controlling him like a puppet. The thing is, though, what I noticed about this chapter, and probably some might not actually recognize it, but this chapter is a correlation or references the first time Bellamy and Luffy first fought, all the way in the past, like, for the first time. Like, in the first, like, past, like, in the beginning parts when Bellamy first got introduced, he was fighting Luffy. When you saw Bellamy introduce his spring power, he was bouncing all over the walls in the past. And the exact same panels that we saw in the first fight with Luffy and Bellamy, it was exactly like in this chapter when you saw Bellamy going back and forth with the wall. In that instance, when Bellamy punched, you know, tried to punch Luffy in, like, this chapter, it was like the opposite in the previous chapters in the past. For instance, Luffy is the one that punched Bellamy. And so to see how Oda kind of switched the roles where instead of Luffy punching Bellamy, it was Bellamy punching Luffy, I felt that really cool. I love that reference to the earlier chapters of One Piece, and once again, it shows you how good Oda is when it comes to actually, like, nodding back to his, like, older work he did of One Piece. So, besides that, okay, besides my overall theory crafting when maybe Luffy used some form of hockey, I can't tell because of the artwork in that entire scene. But besides that, we also move over to some Zoro panels, and we see his fight continuing to progress on with Pika. Now, for the most part, the fight, it's just an update status, and there's not really much going on in Zoro versus Pika. Like, it's not, I mean, they're still fighting and all that, but we had no budge with the progression of the fight, and pretty much not much really massive happened in that fight. Now, past that point, you get to where the giant dude from the Coliseum fights, Mach Vice, or whatever his name is. I forget his exact name, but either way, you have it to where the giant fights Mach Vice, and pretty much Mach Vice gets defeated. The giant dude has to take like 1,000,000 tons to the freaking like arm. You see his bones shatter. I'm like, holy shit. And he pushes the dude up into the birdcage. So, very interesting. I mean, it was, half the chapter was pretty much seeing like fodder, like, you know, just the giant dude fight Mach Vice. That's pretty much what it was. And then the other half was kind of like, for 3 pages, it was just Luffy versus Bellamy for a couple lines. So, the chapter's okay. It was clearly a stalling chapter for Oda. It clearly was, because whatever he's doing with what he did last week, it was a stalling chapter for whatever he's probably going to be doing in the upcoming weeks. So overall, decent chapter, average chapter of One Piece. Tell me your thoughts in the comments below. I love y'all so much. You have a wonderful day or night wherever you live. Please be safe. Chibi out.